This week we are talking about drafting and revising. When most people hear drafting, they usually think about the different times they have to write their paper. In actuality, that is a draft, but you can have a numerous amount of drafts. There is a first draft, okay? And your first draft, honestly, is when you start to create your topic and your thesis and you start to develop your paragraphs. That is what's truly your first draft, when you start to write things down. Now, the thing about drafting, it is different from revising, and most people don't think, when we're thinking about drafting and revising or editing and proofreading, how they're different. With drafting, as I said, it's really getting your information on your paper. We don't really think about corrections. In this moment, we are simply writing. You do not worry about corrections. That includes grammar, sentence structure, verbiage. And when I think about verbiage, I think about subject-verb agreement and making sure those types of things are coherent. Don't necessarily think about, I'll just write it again. And you don't necessarily worry about your format. I know we have to do MLA format, but we don't worry about those things when we are creating our first draft. So as I said, when you turn your first one in, you will not be penalized for any of those things. Of course, I will point them out to you, telling you how to fix some things, how to improve some things. Of course, develop different ideas that may have started and you stopped. I will make sure that you get all of that information when you are starting your draft and you turn it in. But I don't want you to necessarily worry about those, because sometimes for us as writers, the hardest thing is actually getting information on the paper. Okay? And I don't want that to feel like a hindrance to you. Now, when revising comes in, revising happens when once you consider your paper complete, only is when revising occurs. So as you are adding and taking away and thinking about what you want to incorporate into your paper, that is a draft. You only start revising once you figure out you have all your ideas on the paper. Okay? That's when we go back to start to think about how we want to clarify those ideas. And honestly, when people think about writing papers and why they don't like writing, they are probably thinking about revision. Revision does take a lot of time. So I don't want you to feel discouraged, and it is part of the reason for most of our essays we either have 2 weeks or 3 weeks to complete them, to ensure that you turn in a draft, that you're able to revise, and to actually think about the writing process. Okay? Because of course, drafting and revising are also part of the writing process. Here are a couple things that I want you to do when you are thinking and starting to revise. You must give yourself time away from the paper. And what I mean by this is, if you complete your draft that was due on a certain day, don't start your revision the next day. Give yourself at least a day or two to kind of forget the paper in a sense, so that you have time to think about what you want your paper to say. If you're like me, I tend to leave words out, but if I'm looking at the paper, I will read them as if the words are there. So if you give yourself time away from the paper, you're less likely to do those types of things, to infer things into your paper that aren't actually there. You're more likely to be objective. Another thing to do that helps, if it is possible, is to revise on a hard copy. I know most things that we turn in are now digital, but if you're able to print your paper out, please print it out, so that way it's easier for you to make those edits and add things inside. If you have a different color pen from the black ink, that way it draws attention to the writing that you have created, and also helps you recognize what you need to do in the paper. Okay, because revising on a computer screen, you don't really see the changes that you're making in terms of the visual perspective with the different colors. If you have different colors, that makes a difference, especially the way our minds work and how technology affects our thought process. Another thing that really helps is reading your draft aloud. Reading your draft aloud makes a tremendous difference. If you actually read it out loud, you can hear the different issues that you have in it in terms of sentence structure and grammar. You'll notice the different choppiness, or if something flows very well, or you notice you're saying the same thing in the beginning of each sentence or at the end. You'll notice those things if you actually hear them out loud. And also, as I said, you'll notice those missing words that I tend to do if I don't take a break from it. You'll notice those as well. This is one major thing. Do not get overwhelmed with your writing. As writers, many times we either procrastinate and try to stress about writing, or we work so hard that we become overwhelmed. I don't want you to procrastinate, and I don't want you to overwhelm yourself. Okay? So, as you are drafting and revising, think about your assignment, complete as much as possible, but don't freak out about it. Just like drafts, when we're doing revisions, you'll have a chance to fix those issues. Don't worry about it being perfect the first time around. There is no writer that gets everything perfect on the first, and sometimes not even the second try. That is very important for you to remember. A lot of times we tend to forget that, and I don't want you to forget that at all. I want you to remember to make sure that you take your time. Another great point is to revise in stages. And this will tend to help with you not getting overwhelmed. It'll make sure that you only focus on certain parts. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can focus just on certain paragraphs. So you can do, first day you can say, I'm only going to focus on my first paragraph and or my introduction, and then my first body paragraph. And you can say the next day I'll probably do my third, fourth, and fifth body paragraph. And then the third day, your 6, 7, and 8 paragraph and your conclusion. So you can break it apart that way. You can break it up based on certain elements. You can say, well, I'm only going to look at sentence structure today, or I'm only going to look for those things that sound choppy or where ideas are missing. It's actually best for you to figure out what works for you. As I said, I'm never going to force you to do things a certain way when you are thinking about your writing process. If you decide, your topic immediately and you want to start writing, then you can start writing. I'm never going to make you turn in like brainstorms. Now, we will work on brainstorms and we turn those in to make sure you understand how to complete them. But once we actually get to our different essays, I won't say, oh, just turn in a brainstorm. I may have you turn in an outline because some papers are harder to write than others, especially when you're thinking about your comparison, contrast, and cause and effect. But overall, you will not have to just turn in certain sections. So that way you're allowed to try different things and feel comfortable with everything that you are trying to do. Now, one thing that I have found very helpful is revising with an outline. As I just said from last week, we talked about different ways to create outlines. If you find it easier to look at your outline, then go back to your paper, go back and forth between the two. That'll help you a lot. That way you'll know if your points are there or if they've been left out. You can also make sure that you clarify certain things. If you are trying to create a certain pattern, like I said with the pivotal point, then you'll notice, well, if I'm doing pivotal point, then I need to make sure I go back to this section. I left that out. Or you realize, well, I thought I was doing pivotal point. In reality, I'm doing chronological order, which is fine. But I want you to be aware of those different things as you are completing those assignments. And also, when you are revising, you can create little checklists. And we will actually do kind of a workshop where I have these little points that you'll ask yourselves, and you can make those notes on your papers. And of course, I will make some of those notes as well. But as writers, a lot of times we do depend on our teachers' comments a lot compared to our own. And an important thing for you this semester is to start trusting yourself and start trusting your own writing process. You have a voice, it deserves to be heard, and you are a great writer, regardless of what anybody else has said, regardless of the red pens you have seen on your papers. I know a lot of times we tend to be very nervous about writing. Even with our diagnostic, I've had some students say, well, Ms. Evans, can you check my diagnostic? And I said, well, the purpose of the diagnostic is to see what issues you have in your writing so that we can have little mini sessions about certain things if necessary. So don't feel overly conscious about it. Just let your writing flow so that you have an idea of what to expect. One thing that we'll do with this, of course, I will have comments for you. If necessary, we can have conferences when you are revising, so you won't have to stress about that. We have a writing center. I have some great tutors who are willing to help you with your writing as well. And at one point, we will do peer editing, and I will let you know which essay that is, so that whatever you write about, if you decide you don't want your peers to read it, if it's something very touching, then we can talk about that. I don't want you to feel worried about people thinking about your writing in a particular way, and so I will definitely let you know about that as well. And I will make sure that I send out the different tutors that we have, so you can contact them and set up different sessions. And if you actually set up a session and you complete the actual session and attend, I will give you bonus points. So don't be shy. Make sure that you speak up for yourself, get help. Make sure that you think about your writing, think about the process, but don't get overwhelmed. Another thing to think about when you are drafting/revising, once you have got to that revising stage, I want you to think about what it means to get to that final draft. So as you are drafting and revising within that draft, you have to get to the end. Once you get to the end, I want you to think about your title. A lot of times we don't think about titles for our papers. I want you to think about your title and think about how it is connected to your introduction, your body paragraphs, your overall essay in general. A lot of times we tend to just say narrative essay or final draft or something like that. Actually think about your title that you are creating and what it means for your paper.